Good evening, Stonegate audience. I hope everyone is doing out there and has had a great weekend. This is Bill Griesmer, the managing member of Stonegate Capital, and just giving you a little 5-minute lesson here about note investing here, which is what we do. So last week, you might remember, we talked a little bit about some simple math equations that we used. They were more so applicable for looking at performing notes at that point. We talked about loan to value, again, which is shortened LTV. And then we talked about how to calculate a rough estimate of your borrower equity. So I actually do figure those out on every single note. But tonight, if I'm talking a little bit about performing notes, those things might be relative. I stress might. But you have to keep in mind, on a non-performing note, we're looking at a note that for whatever reason that borrower has stopped paying, at least for 90 days. So, it's not as important to me exactly what their loan to value was. The only reason that I will take it into account is if I feel there's a really good chance, for whatever reason, that I can get that borrower to either reinstate or modify that mortgage. Maybe I'm able to find out, for example, that they lost their job, and then I find out that they actually got a new job. Or maybe when I have someone go buy the property, which you want to do every single note, maybe I find out that, boy, oh boy, they've got the bushes trimmed just so, they've got the trim all perfectly painted. They're putting a lot of care and a lot of TLC into that home. That gives them, they have a lot of what you call emotional equity there. That shows there might be a good chance that they'd want to stay. So in a situation like one of those, there's no hard and set rule really. I might pay a little bit more attention to those, but I'm also going to pay a lot of attention to these other equations I'm talking about tonight. So these newer ones would be investment to value. So instead of loan to value here, I'm talking about the investment to value. Real simple. It's grade school algebra, math, even just basic math, not even algebra. It's just the purchase price, how much I'm going to pay for that note, divided by the fair market value of the note. So on my example down here, if say the note was $55,000, okay, that's around what a reasonable investor might pay, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, depending on circumstances. But if you have you're buying that on a $100,000 house, and yes, lots of those exist in the Midwest, that would equal a 55% investment to value. So that's basically a measure of my security, of my safety. However, what I kind of realized myself, since that is a percent, it doesn't give me as much information as I would really like to know. Again, the example I used last week still holds. There'd be a big difference between 55% on a $20,000 house and 55% on a $200,000 house. So then the other calculation, I doubt I'm the first one in the history of note investing that's ever come up with this, but I also like to figure out my investor equity. And that's pretty simple to figure out. That's the fair market value minus the purchase price of the note. So again, the example I used here, if I have a $100,000 house minus the $55,000, okay, and maybe this had to go to foreclosure sale, for example, you always want to think about your worst possible outcome. That would equal $45,000. So what that means is I've got like roughly $45,000 to play with as my margin of equity to at least get my money back out of it. So say, that house does go to foreclosure sale, okay? And although the, normal, well-polished value of the house is $100,000, say that it does not sell for $100,000 there. Say it sells for only say $75,000. So if that is the case, I still might make a quick $20,000 on that deal. okay? Even though the house sold for 3/4 of what I thought it was worth for $75,000, if I'm only paying $55,000 for that note, and this is a very, very simple example. I know in real life there's lots of other values and figures that might come into that. But even just using that extremely simple example, I might still make $20,000 on it. That doesn't mean it's instant now, depending on the state where you're at and the different time frames and such. That might take you a year to get that, $20,000 return, especially if you're here in a state like Ohio or something like that. In a state like New Jersey or New York, it might take you 2 or 3 or even 4 years to get that. If you're in a state like Texas, it might very well take you just a couple of months. But just the idea tonight was just to give you those real short and simple and sweet equations there. And that I'm going to wrap it up for tonight. I see I've got a couple people that joined me live. Thank you very much, Dan Zatofsky. Guys, if he's one of the best in the business, if ever you are on Facebook and you see him teaching anything, do yourself a favor and tune in. And thank you everybody else that is watching live. And when I made this tonight, actually, I'm probably going to have a math part 3, actually, is what I was looking at. I was going to make this a little longer tonight, but instead of doing that, it just seems to flow better if these are short and sweet and to the point. So I'm going to wrap it up there. So please join me again next week here for part 3 of Math for Note Investors. Until then, I don't see any questions here. So until then, thank you very much for joining me this evening. Have a great night, and that is how you climb the hill. Thanks again, everybody. Have a good night. Bye-bye.